Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise in the House today to table budget documents for 2018, including notices of Ways and Means motions. The details of the measures are laid out in these documents, and I would request that the study of these motions be listed on the orders of the day. I also wish to announce that the government will introduce legislation to implement the measures of the budget.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, last week I spent some time with a couple of grade 6 classes from Rose Avenue Junior Public School in downtown Toronto. It's an extraordinary school. More than 85% of the students have English as their second language. They're bright, curious, and hardworking. And when they had the chance to ask me about today's budget, well, Mr. Speaker, they would have made all members of this House proud. These 10 and 11-year-old students wanted to know what our government's doing for Indigenous peoples. They asked about science and discovery, about supporting seniors, protecting nature, increasing immigration, and helping the homeless. They even asked me about Canada-US relations. What impressed me most was how forward-looking each of the questions were. Les enfants de...
The children at Rose Avenue School, and at schools all across the country, care about the future. They understand that the decisions we make today will transform the world that they will grow up in.
And they're looking at us to make good decisions, smart decisions, so that they can have a better opportunity to follow their dreams, find good jobs, and give back to their community. Mr. Speaker, that's what this budget is all about. It's a plan that puts people first, that invests in the things that matter most to Canadians, that builds on their hard work, and that keeps us squarely focused on their future. Budget 2018 is also a plan that respects the choice that Canadians made just a little over 2 years ago. At that time, Canadians had the opportunity to stay the course. They could stick with a government that favored cuts and a set of failed policies that produced stubborn unemployment and the worst decade of economic growth since the Great Depression. Or they could choose a more ambitious and confident approach. Canadians chose the latter. They put their trust Mr. Speaker, in a new government because they knew that we put our trust in them. We took that trust, balanced it with sound fiscal management that includes a declining debt-to-GDP ratio and gave Canadians the tools they need to succeed. Tout d'abord, nous avons aussi...
First, we raised taxes on the wealthiest so we could lower them for the middle class. After that, we introduced the Canada Child Benefit to put more money in the pockets of low and middle-income parents every month to help them with the cost of raising kids. And this summer, 2 years ahead of schedule, we will ensure that the benefit increases along with the rising cost of living. The Canada Child Benefit means that, on average, families get $6,800 a year, tax-free, for books, hockey lessons, or warm clothes for winter. It means that today, about 300,000 fewer children live below the poverty line. That's down 40% from what it was in 2013.
To help Canadians feel more confident about their future, we strengthened the Canada Pension Plan to help workers today and for generations to come. Thanks to the trust that Canadians placed in us, we're able to help 900,000 seniors through increases to the Guaranteed Income Supplement. We helped students get ahead with increases to Canada student grants. We cut taxes for small businesses while making sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share. We're helping more people find a safe and affordable place to call home with the first ever national housing strategy. And we're working with provinces, territories, and cities to ensure a stable housing market. We're giving more children the best possible start in life through investments in early learning and childcare. We now have agreements in place with 9 provinces and territories to help create more of the high-quality, affordable childcare spaces we know that Canadian families need, tailored to their local realities. And think about the fact that the vast majority of single moms receiving the Canada Child Benefit make less than $60,000 a year and now get an average of about $9,000 in total benefits tax-free each year. Over the last year, Mr. Speaker, we've really seen these investments pay off. The economy, the Canadian economy, is doing well, remarkably well. Over the last 2 years, hardworking Canadians have created nearly 600,000 new jobs, most of them full-time. Unemployment rates are near the lowest that we've seen them in 40 years. Mr. Speaker, our plan is working because Canadians are working. Aujourd'hui, le Canada.
Today, Canada leads all other G7 countries in economic growth, and Canadians are feeling confident about the future, whether their plan is to pay down debt, save for a first home, or go back to school to train for a new job. That's why we are able to invest in the things that matter to Canadians, while making steady improvements to our bottom line.
We know that there are challenges in the immediate term, and we're responding to those challenges. We know that businesses are concerned about the outcome of NAFTA talks and tax changes in the United States. We'll be vigilant in making sure Canada remains a great place to invest, create jobs, and do business. And we'll do this in a responsible way, carefully, letting evidence and not emotion guide our decisions. At the same time, we need to stay focused on our long-term goal of building an economy that works for everyone. With a strong and growing economy in place, we believe that now is the right time to focus on the deeper challenges that hold our economy and our people back. That means making sure that every Canadian has a real and fair chance to work, to contribute to our economy, and to succeed. It's important not just as a matter of fairness, but as a way to ensure Canada's long-term growth. For the first time in our history, there are now more Canadians aged 65 and older than there are people under the age of 15. That presents a real challenge. As seniors leave the workforce, we need to think about who will fill the gap. We believe that Canada's future success rests on making sure that every Canadian has an opportunity to work and to earn a good living from that work. And that includes Canada's talented, ambitious, and hard-working women. I'd like to tell you a story, Mr. Speaker, about one such woman. Her name's Joan. I met Joan a few weeks ago at Algonquin College. Encouraged by her daughter, Joan went back to school after raising her family. When she first enrolled in school, she thought that she was going to study event planning. But when she got there, she changed her mind because she wanted to pursue a trade and wants to become an apprentice plumber. Now, Joan didn't see herself at first getting into the trades, and she'll be the first choice to tell you that that choice took some of her friends by surprise. But she also feels that it's her true calling. It's work that she's good at, it's work that she wants to do, and she's never looked back. Now, I mention Joan because it's people like her who have the courage to try new things, to forge new paths that make our economy strong and guarantee its future. Over the last 40 years, the rising number of women participating in our workforce has accounted for about a third of our economic growth. That means a better standard of living for all Canadians, thanks to the hard work of women like Joan, who entered or re-entered the workforce. C'est grâce à ces femmes.
Thanks to these women and their contribution to the economy, Family incomes are now higher. Fewer children live in poverty, and all Canadians are better off.
At the same time, for as much progress as we've seen, there continue to be persistent barriers that hold too many women back. A few weeks ago, the Prime Minister issued a challenge to the world's business leaders to hire, promote, and retain more women. As he said, it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. We just need to do the math. On average, women earn just 69 cents for every dollar earned by men, even though about 3/4 of young women have a post-secondary certificate or degree. Even women who graduate from high-demand fields like science, technology, engineering, and math earn about $9,000 less per year than their male peers. It's an important issue, Mr. Speaker, that we need to get at. It's not right, and it's not smart either. We know that diversity in the workforce boosts productivity and profitability, and studies have shown that increasing gender diversity alone leads to more growth. According to the Centre for International Governance Innovation, a 1% increase in gender diversity means about a 3.5% bump in revenue for those companies that actively seek to hire more women. And results are even better when women are in leadership positions. When women hold leadership positions, companies see stronger financial results. They see more innovation and more effective decision-making at the board level. And I can tell you from personal experience, our cabinet is stronger, our government is stronger, and Canadians are better served because half of the cabinet ministers that we have, the people around the table, are strong, intelligent, and effective women. That's why this House has passed amendments that will require federally incorporated corporations to make annual disclosures about the diversity of their senior management teams and boards of directors. We need to think about what equality can mean for Canada. McKinsey Global Institute estimates that by taking steps to advance women's equality, such as employing more women in technology, boosting women's participation in the workforce, Canada could add about $150 billion to its economy by 2026. And RBC estimates that if Canada had a completely equal representation of women and men in our workforce, we could have increased the size of our economy by 4% last year. 4%. When I draft budgets, I fight for every decimal point of growth. Even reaching half that goal, boosting our economy by 2%, would be hugely significant. It would mean more middle-class jobs, more Canadians who have money to pay their bills or save for retirement. Alors, qu'allons-nous faire?
So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make sure that more women and girls can be self-reliant and help their families while helping to grow our economy?
By making progress when it comes to equal pay for work of equal value. In this budget, the government's taking an historic and meaningful step by moving forward with proactive pay equity legislation in federally regulated sectors. Mr. Speaker, we know that we can't make this necessary change happen for all Canadian women overnight, but what we can do is lead by example. We're trying to encourage all employers to reflect on the way in which work done by women has been too often undervalued and take action to close the gender wage gap and also improve their business prospects. Second, we need to recognize that some of this gap is due to the fact that childcare and caregiving duties in general fall disproportionately on women. In this budget, we're offering a use it or lose it incentive to encourage both parents in a two-parent family to share equally in the work of raising their children. With the EI parental sharing benefit, two-parent families who agree to share parental leave could receive an additional 5 weeks of leave, making it easier for women to return to work sooner if they so choose. And when that precious time runs out, we know that families need greater access to quality childcare, affordable childcare. which is why we've already invested more than $7.5 billion in early learning and childcare, which will create up to 40,000 new subsidized spaces over the next 3 years while making existing spaces more affordable.
Third, we need to do more to support greater numbers of women in management and leadership positions.
From members of the Canada-United States Council for Advancement of Women in taking a comprehensive approach to helping women entrepreneurs so that they can scale up their businesses, create jobs, and access the mentorship and the capital they need to take their businesses to the next level. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we know that we can't push for equality without confronting some difficult truths. Movements like Me Too and Time's Up have shed light on disturbing situations and behaviors that too often go unreported. So to better support those who've been victims of sexual harassment in the workplace, we'll boost legal aid funding across the country so that victims we want to make sure that victims can better understand their rights and get the help they need. I'd like to add, Mr. Speaker, that the work that we're doing to increase the participation of women in our economy and our society can be seen across our entire budget. No budget decision was taken without being informed by what we call gender budget and that gender-based analysis plus. I want to thank the Minister for the Status of Women for her help in making this possible. Now, we firmly believe that this must not be a one-time event. It must be how all future budgets are made. So we'll be seeking to introduce new legislation to make this a permanent part of the federal budget-making process. And we're going to make Status of Women a full department in the Government of Canada. Bravo.
With this budget, we are doubling down on our plan to invest in the middle class and in people working hard to join it. We will do that by strengthening the programs that make the biggest difference in people's lives and by making those benefits easier to get.
Includes the new Canada Workers Benefit, a strengthened, more accessible, and more generous replacement for the working income tax benefit. The Canada Workers Benefit will allow low-income workers to take home more money while they work, encouraging more people to join the workforce and stay in the workforce, and offering real help to more than 2 million Canadians. Bravo. At the same time, we'll make it easier for people to access the benefit that they deserve by making this benefit more generous and by automatically giving the benefit to all those that qualify. Will help lift about 70,000 more Canadians out of poverty. As I mentioned earlier, we've taken steps to strengthen the Canada Child Benefit so that the benefit it delivers keeps pace with the cost of living. We're also continuing to make investments that will help people in times of change, whether they're entering the workforce for the first time, retraining for a new job, or planning for retirement. We're making additional investments in our ambitious innovation and skills plan, including targeted help for women in the trades like Joan, and for newcomer women looking to find meaningful work. And we're also taking steps to ensure that our tax system is fair for all Canadians. We can't have an economy that works for everyone if everyone doesn't pay their fair share. That's why we've given the Canada Revenue Agency $1 billion in our first budgets to crack down on tax cheats and offshore tax havens. And with every dollar we invest, we expect $5 in recovered revenue. It's about fairness, Mr. Speaker. We're also making sure that the small business tax rate, on track to fall to 9%, the lowest among G7 countries, is available only to small businesses that want to invest, grow, and create more jobs. We're changing the rules for the top 2 or 3% of private corporations because the wealthiest Canadians should not be able to use private corporations to pay less tax than the middle class. Mr. Speaker, by making smart investments today, the kind that give more people a real and fair chance at success, we can build a forward-looking economy for Canada, one that responds to the needs of a changing world, one that will give the young students at Rose Avenue Public School a real chance to grow and to shine in jobs they're qualified for and excited to have. As the Perimeter Institute's Neil Turok says, it's our curiosity, courage, creativity, and a collaborative spirit that leads us to innovate. That pushes us to create the new technologies that improve our daily lives, make us healthier, drive our economy, and move our country forward. To foster that spirit of innovation and help build the new industries and jobs that our economy will rely on in future years, we'll make significant new investments in Canada's scientists and researchers to make sure that they have the funding and the support required to do their work. The Fundamental Science Review, led by Dr. David Naylor and engineered by our Minister of Science, told us that to advance Canadian businesses and Canada's long-term competitiveness, we need to invest in the people behind the big new ideas. Well, that's exactly what we're doing in this budget, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2018 represents the single largest investment in fundamental and discovery research in Canadian history. But more than that, we'll make sure that the new money for research supports the next generation of researchers so that we can build a science community that looks more like Canada, more diverse, with a greater number of women. Our government also believes that the most important way in which our future needs to be better than our past has to do with the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. Together, we're working to improve the quality of life for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations people in Canada. This budget invests in new tools to help nations rebuild, to accelerate self-determination and self-government based on the recognition of Indigenous rights, so that our shared future is one where Indigenous peoples are in control of their own destiny, making their own decisions about their future. To that end, we're making new investments that will accelerate work to deliver clean, safe drinking water to more Indigenous communities ahead of schedule. We've already lifted 52 long-term boil water advisories, and Mr. Speaker, we're on track to have all others eliminated by March 2021. We're making investments that will help create better opportunities for Indigenous peoples to find and keep good, well-paying jobs, that will build more safe and affordable housing in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations communities, and that will give better child and family service support with a special focus on prevention so that Indigenous children are not taken from their families and their communities. To further the important work of reconciliation, we're also investing in the Gord Downey and Shawnee Wenjack Fund to promote cross-cultural dialogue, create places and spaces dedicated to reconciliation, so that more Canadians can be part of building a new and better relation with Indigenous peoples.
As the Prime Minister has said many times, when it comes to renewing the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples, we have a responsibility to do better and to do more. This budget will help us live up to that responsibility for the benefit of Indigenous women, men, and children, and all Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, today's budget is for all Canadians across our country. To bring people and communities together will increase funding for multiculturalism, provide new funding to ensure the success of Black Canadians, and consult on a new national anti-racism approach to combat discrimination in our country. To help more people find an affordable place to call home, we're working on innovative solutions, like the Rental Construction Financing Initiative that will build an additional 14,000 new rental units across the country. To safeguard Canadians' privacy and protect both our digital economy and our country, we're making an over $750 million investment in cybersecurity in this country. To help families and communities being devastated by the opioid crisis, we'll make investments of $230 million, including to provide additional emergency funding for provinces and territories so people can access evidence-based treatment services and get the help that they need.
To help workers in seasonal industries like fisheries and tourism, we will work to address the EI black hole, helping families make ends meet until the new work season begins.
Together with our provincial partners, we'll protect forestry jobs by stopping the invasive spread of spruce budworm in Atlantic Canada. Across the country, we'll make new investments to support safe and accessible small craft harbours, essential to Canada's fishery industry and coastal communities.
The Government of Canada will do more to support our official language minority communities and ensure the dynamism and vitality of the Canadian francophonie.
Mr. Speaker, we'll create jobs in regions and rural communities across Canada and provide tailored support for women entrepreneurs through investments in our regional development agencies. ACOA, l'Agence de Développement Économique,
the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec,
FedNor, and Western Economic Diversification. Bravo. Monsieur le Président.
And Mr. Speaker, we will also do more to help vulnerable people around the world by making the largest new investments in international assistance in more than a decade, including greater support for the world's women and girls through Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy.
Now, Mr. Speaker, there rest challenges in our country. Today, at least 1 in 10 Canadians cannot afford the prescription drugs that they need. And every year, over 1 million Canadians are forced to give up food and heat in order to afford their medicines. To address this, we've created an advisory council on the implementation of national pharmacare, to be headed by Dr. Eric Hoskins, with a mandate team will have a mandate to study, evaluate, and ultimately recommend options on a path forward on pharmacare that puts Canadians first. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this budget recognizes something that every Canadian understands, that our quality of life and our present and our future prosperity is deeply connected to the environment in which we live, the extraordinary beauty Canada's parks, nature, and wild spaces. These are central to our identity as Canadians. I will say that for my family, it was the chance to witness firsthand the majestic beauty of Canada's north. We've all had experiences like these, Mr. Speaker, whether it's camping with our families, going for a quiet hike alone in the woods. How many of us have gone ice fishing with our friends, or learned to swim at the end of a dock in a freezing cold lake? Watched our kids skip rocks on the shore, or play in the leaves on a breezy fall day. These are the experiences that help to define us as Canadians. When we encouraged Canadians to visit our national parks last year, they responded by the millions. Some parks were so busy that they had to turn people away. We saw how popular our free admissions program was, and that's why we decided to make Canada's national parks permanently free. Mr. Speaker, unlike past governments, we know that Canadians deserve more than just good enough when it comes to protecting the land that we love. And so we're helping to deliver one of the largest commitments to conservation in Canada's history, with an investment of $1.3 billion to conserve more land and waters, preserve biodiversity, and protect wildlife in our country. This will include a $500 million investment from the federal government to create a new $1 billion nature fund in partnership with corporate, not-for-profit, provincial, territorial, and other partners. Canada is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's up to all of us to help keep it that way. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, over the last several months, as I traveled the country in preparation for this budget, I had the opportunity to meet with Canadians and hear their stories. These were stories of hardships and frustration, but also stories of generosity and hope. I'm inspired by those stories, and I'm inspired to do even more to help the next generation break free from the barriers that have held us back for too long.
In my life, I'm proud to have 2 young daughters and 2 young men who call me Dad. I was home alone a few weekends ago, and I noticed a new poster hanging over one of my daughter's beds. In bold, handwritten lettering, there was a quote there from Malala that said, "We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back." Nous ne pouvons pas.
We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back.
For me, Mr. Speaker, it was a blinding flash of the obvious. She gets it. The next generation gets it. The children at Rose Avenue Junior Public School, they get it too. It's time for the rest of us to catch up. Mr. Speaker, before I got into politics, I worked in the private sector. And I have opportunities now, as Minister of Finance, to meet regularly with Canada's top business leaders and CEOs. And I can tell you that there's not one leader out there who would stand for anything that arbitrarily holds back half the people in their organization. It just doesn't make sense. Yet as a society, we allow it to happen. Not arbitrarily, but systematically. Well, that changes today, Mr. Speaker. With this budget built for all Canadians. With this budget, we're tackling the challenge of equality head-on, asking tough questions and beginning to provide important solutions. We're taking steps to track our progress so that our government and all future governments may be held accountable for that progress. Progress, Mr. Speaker, that I look forward to making in collaboration with all members of this House, including the members of the Finance Committee, and with our colleagues in the Senate. There really is no turning back. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, said that equal pay and better opportunities for women were an economic no-brainer. Well, our government agrees. So we'll continue to work hard to show Canada and the world how good we can be, how fair we can be, and how smart we can be. We'll all be better off because of it. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order, please. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While the Liberals are celebrating and trying to make Canadians believe that this is a great day today, Order. I would encourage all members to save their applause for later and for their own size. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps we'll get to the end of the question if they stop celebrating as they're doing now. Now, what we see in this budget and in the Finance Minister's speech is that while Canadians were listening to the speech, they had images of the Prime Minister and 19 other ministers just going off on vacation, whether it was India or elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, they had that image of the Prime Minister receiving illegal vacations on the Aga Khan's Island. They had images in their head of the Prime Minister and the government and the Minister of Finance who are using money irresponsibly. And when you look at this budget, what you see, Mr. Speaker, is that there are measures to relieve the burdens of Canadians. Do you? No, actually, hardly any. They're crumbs. Crumbs, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that this government made the promise to limit deficits to $10 million. They didn't keep that promise. They committed, they made a formal commitment. The Prime Minister said it himself throughout his 2015 election campaign that he would get back to a balanced budget in 2019. But what we see today, Mr. Speaker, is that deficit will be 3 times higher. It'll be $18 billion. And the last point I'd like to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. While we're going through these difficult negotiations with our neighbour to the south, while the government to the south is decreasing taxes to stimulate the economy, in this document, in this 423 budget document, there's less than 1 page that has been devoted and $0 that has been set aside in the case of a failure in those negotiations. So my question is this. Given all I have said, and given the promise of the Prime Minister during his election campaign to get back to a balanced budget next year, will the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance confirm to Canadians that everything will be balanced by next year so that next generations and our grandchildren will not be responsible for the mistakes of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, we had a very important discussion in this country. There were 2 choices. There were that choice to invest in Canadians, or there was a choice to cut. And we said at the time, we explained that it was very important to invest in Canadians, to invest in the future of Canadians. And so, what happened? We invested in the Canada Child Benefit. We helped 9 families out of 10 with more money in their pockets, in the pockets of their families, for their future. What else? Well, our economy. Our economy is growing. We found the solution is true. If you invest in Canadian families, then the economy grows. The economy goes very well, and that's what we're seeing now. 600,000 new jobs, Mr. Speaker, in our country, rather. Mr. Speaker, the economy is going well, and the economy works when Canadians are working. So we will continue with this responsible, fiscally responsible agenda. And the reason is very important, because if you invest in families, if you invest in the middle class, then Canadian circumstances improve. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Basque. Mr. Speaker, 25 years ago, the Liberals promised to implement a Canadian pharmacare program. And now, you know, in 2006, 13 years later, they hadn't even started. So it's difficult to follow what's going on.
Ago, we actually tabled a motion to ask the government to start negotiating with the provinces and territories to implement a national Medicare program. And you know what? They voted against this. They voted against this, Mr. Speaker. And now they actually propose an advisory council on pharmacare, which, you know what, doesn't commit a single dollar on this program. It doesn't even commit a single dollar on this council. So I'd like to try not to be cynical, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, they're making it very, very hard not to do so. How can we have, without any commitment in that direction, with knowing that we only have a council, another study, and I will remind you that the Standing Committee on Health has been studying this for months now, and we have countless other studies that show the path. How can we know that this Liberal promise of a national pharmacare program is at least worth more than the paper that this ultimate report will be printed on?
Finance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to hear that the member opposite recognizes, as the government recognizes, that we need to consider how we can ensure all Canadians have access to pharmaceuticals. This is an important issue that we need to deal with. The reason we are moving forward, Mr. Speaker, with an advisory committee led by Dr. Eric Hoskins is because we know that we need to get this right. The responsible approach to dealing with this issue is to do it for the long term, to make sure Canadians can see the benefits from a healthcare system that works in all the ways it should work. We're going to do this responsibly, Mr. Speaker. We're going to study the issue and get it right. And what I can say is this is a government that has followed through on our promises. We promised the Canada Child Benefit, we promised a national housing strategy, and now we're examining so that we can get right pharmacare for the long-term future of Canada.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Speaker, so to the Minister, I see a budget that's good for bankers, Bay Street, bondholders and bureaucrats. $175 billion in interest debt payments alone for the time span of this budget. And if you look at the numbers carefully at the back of the budget, if you add Crown Corporation debt and the national debt, $1 trillion by 2019. To the Minister of Finance, when will the budget be balanced?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important to consider the frame of this. What we've done is we've shown that when you invest in Canadians, when you have confidence in Canadians, you can see real impacts. That's exactly what we've done. Now let's consider the context here. Canada. We have the lowest net debt to GDP in the G7 countries. Better yet, what we're showing is a declining net debt to GDP over the course of 5 years. So we're able to make investments in Canadians, get Canadians working, grow the economy, and do it in a fiscally responsible way. That is exactly what we promised Canadians we would do. We know that having confidence in Canadians is much more important than making cuts that would only serve to reduce the number of jobs that Canadians have. That's our approach.
Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has tasked the Minister in Premier Kathleen Wynne's government, who headed up the largest ministry in the province of Ontario, with proposing the largest new federal program in decades, something that could cost upwards of $20 billion a year. How can he have confidence that this isn't going to result in the same fiscal mess federally that we now see in the province of Ontario.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should look at actual outcomes to consider what this government has done. What we did was 2 years ago, we said that we should make investments in Canadians. We said that we should have confidence in Canadians because that would allow us to grow the economy. And that is exactly what happened. Highest growth rate among G7 countries, lowest unemployment rates in 40 years. That's where we find ourselves. So as we look forward to pharmacare, what we're going to do is very carefully analyze how we can best deliver for Canadians access to pharmaceuticals, for all Canadians. We know that our system right now presents some Canadians with a good situation and others with a challenging situation. The advisory committee will be tasked with figuring out how we can move forward to get this right. Like everything else we've done, we're going to do it responsibly and make a real and long-term difference for Canadians.
I would ask the honourable member for Edmonton Manning and the honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton not to be interrupting when someone else has the floor. Resuming debate, the honourable leader of the opposition.
Here. Mr. Speaker, this budget shows just how much this Liberal government has failed to deliver the very basics of good governance for the Canadian community.
For almost 3 years, the Prime Minister's speeches have not been put into action.
Worked hard to earn and gave to the government, that the government took, should actually provide some meaningful help to you and your family or your community is not too much to ask. It is the absolute minimum this government, with all of its loud promises, should be able to deliver. And yet we see all its failures. In fact, Mr. Speaker, never has a politician boasted so much and spent so much and achieved so little. Hear, hear. And you'll pardon us, Mr. Speaker, you'll pardon us on this side of the House if we don't share the enthusiasm and confidence in a minister from Kathleen Wynne's government being able to do anything for the people of Canada.
And when I speak tomorrow, I will be speaking about the record of failures by this government, who does not put people before government.
Confidence in Canadians is to put people before government. Hear, hear. But until then, Mr. Speaker, until tomorrow, I move, seconded by the opposition House Leader, that the debate be now adjourned. Hear, hear.
Mr. Chair, seconded by Ms. Bergen, moves that the debate be now adjourned. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, the motion is deemed adopted, and the House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 2 p.m.